Welcome to time period 3 and one of your first lectures. We decided that we should split up Islam into two different lectures. We felt that studying Islam as a religion and then studying it as a political entity was something that was important to distinguish between the two. Islam as a religion turned into political empire, and so we just want to make sure you know the difference between the religious part of Islam and then of course the political part. So just to make sure that we have some vocabulary down, Islam actually means submission in Arabic. So Islam, the religion, is actually talking about submission to the monotheistic God that was promoted by Abraham. So this is the same God of Judaism and Christianity. It's not a separate God at all. They just use the word Allah is Arabic for the word God. Muslim are those who submit. So those who practice the submission to God, to Allah, are called Muslims. There's no such thing as Islams. Islams is a word that people use a lot, and it doesn't mean anything. It is not a real word. The practicers of Islam are called Muslims. The Quran is the Muslim holy book. And this holy book is a little bit different from the Bible. It really is about the life of Muhammad and his revelations. Muhammad is considered to be one of the most recent prophet of God. Jesus was also, in Islam, is also considered a prophet. Abraham's a prophet. Moses is a prophet. So all of these major figures from Judaism and Christianity are all considered prophets, and Muhammad is just the most recent. The teachings of the Quran and Muhammad can only be fulfilled if you have an ummah, which is a community. So we will use this idea of community throughout the study of Islam. And part of that development of that community is why Islam turned into a political entity in the Middle East during this kind of power vacuum time between the fall of Rome and the rise of Western Europe. It began in Arabia. Basically, there was in the deserts you had a bunch of Bedouin tribes, and they were organized into different clans. And the reason why they didn't necessarily develop any major cities, there's nothing going on like a London or anything, or Paris, or what the Romans were doing, is simply because of a lack of resources. There were some small major city centers like Mecca and Medina because they did have access to water. And the tribes were all polytheistic tribes. These are all people who did not necessarily convert to a monotheistic religion when Abraham was wandering through this region. They were still polytheistic. Mecca was already an important religious center. It housed what was called basically the Kaaba. The Kaaba is a building where the black stone is found, and the black stone has religious implications for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the black stone is supposed to be the site where God God demanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Abraham obeyed. However, also housed at the Kaaba during the early stages was a bunch of other idols for different polytheistic gods. So it didn't just house this relic for Judaism, it also housed relics for other polytheistic gods, which made Mecca an important trade and pilgrimage site. Muhammad, just to give you a little background on who he was orphaned. He was a merchant. That's actually very significant to Islam's development, the fact that it was developed by a merchant, by a trader, by a nomadic merchant. The fact that the religion is going to spread through trade is significant in that it was a merchant who created the religion. He married Khadijah, who was a wealthy widow, and he had 4 kids with her. He spent a lot of time in meditation. Meditation was something that he practiced. It was part of his daily ritual. And at one point in 610, the Archangel Gabriel came to Muhammad during one of these meditations and spoke to him about basically what the monotheistic God that had already been in existence wanted from his people. And Muhammad would come out of his meditations and would speak about these conversations with Gabriel to Khadijah, to his family members, and ultimately he became this teacher as a result of all of that. The people at first just memorized what Muhammad was teaching. He would teach just ideas of what will ultimately become the revelations which were written down in the Quran. The Quran was not written down for quite some time. It took one of the caliphs, Umar the First, to actually put the Quran together. It is considered to be the absolute uncorrupted word of God. The issue is that because the Bible or the New Testament and the Old Testament were both written before the advent of new technologies of paper and the printing press and things like that, there is a sense that perhaps what was written in the Old Testament and the New Testament was corrupted through translations and through the lack of technology. Now, that is something that that Muslims throughout the world believe, that that the Quran is the purest form of the words of God to his people. It is written in a poetic form. The paper will actually aid Islam in its spread as well. That's something that is important to the spread of Islam, is the fact that it was written on paper that was a new technology and that it's going to be kind of long lasting. The main teachings of Islam are called the 5 pillars. Basically, the first is that you declare there's no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet. You should pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. Muslims are expected to give alms to the poor, charity. They need to fast during Ramadan, and they need to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lifetime. If you are unable to fulfill your pilgrimage, it doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot find oneness with God. It's just one of the steps that you're supposed to take as a Muslim. I did want to discuss this word jihad. Jihad has been used politically in the United States due to the radical groups of terrorists that are associated with Islam. That does not mean that every Muslim adheres to the radical form of the definition of this word. Jihad translates directly into English as sacred struggle. Some people feel that some practitioners actually call this the 6th pillar, and basically there's 2 ways to interpret this word. One is to create physical warfare to expand Dar al-Islam, which is territory that Islam and religious laws may be practiced. So you can look at it as a political term. Some and most Muslims feel that it's meant to explain the personal struggle, that it's the personal struggle to practice and to submit to Allah and to practice Islam to its fullest. It has nothing to do with political conquering or to create a political empire. So the term jihad has been used by Muslim extremists to justify what they do. However, the majority of Muslims throughout the world take the second non-political definition of the word. Islam is another universalizing religion. Anyone can convert to Islam. It is an easy religion to convert to. Again, we saw that with Buddhism and Christianity, the idea that there is a salvation, there is an afterlife, there is guidance in this world, there is hope in this world, will increase the spread of it because the lower classes are going to convert to this religion. There is that idea of hell still in Islam, that they will burn in the afterlife, and it's very similar to the Christian version of hell. Just to kind of give you a comparison between Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, they're all monotheistic religions. The rich need to help the poor. There will be some type of final judgment day in Zoroastrianism and Christianity. This concept is not something that is in Judaism. Jews feel that the end of the world will come when the Messiah creates a political empire them to live in. They all practice regular prayer and recital of specific creeds. Creeds are any type of special prayers. So, for example, in Christianity, the Lord's Prayer. Judaism has the Psalms and has specific prayers as well. Islam, of course, has their specific prayers. Animal sacrifice was used in both Judaism and Zoroastrianism. Islam does have one holiday where they do sacrifice a lamb, and then ritual washing was part of Judaism and Zoroastrianism as well as Islam. Christianity's ritual washing is limited to baptism, which is controversial in regards to when you actually baptize, and of course the crossing with holy water when you enter into sacred sites like a church. But they don't do full-on ritual washings like what Muslims and Jews and Zoroastrians will do. Basic teaching. Muhammad, like I said, was another prophet in a long line of prophets. Abraham was the first Muslim, the first person to submit to God. Earlier prophets' teachings were corrupted. The idea of Jesus as divine, the idea of Jesus as part of the Trinity corrupts the idea of monotheism. So Islam rejects the idea of Jesus as part of the Trinity, and the Jews didn't like what the Muslims were doing with the development of a political empire. So that's where the controversy comes between the three different religions. However, because all three religions are considered to be worshiping the same God, Jews and Christians were given freedom politically in the Muslim territories. Usually there was a tax associated with being allowed to practice your Jewish or Christian religion, but they were free to practice that religion. And they were often given special privileges within these empires because they were still worshiping the same God. There are ceremonies and rites and passages that you have your Hajj to Mecca that you're supposed to take once in your lifetime. The prayer 5 times a day with the ritual washing. This ritual washing is actually one of the things that saved the Middle East from the Black Death and the plague. The ritual washing allowed and the use of water in the practice of the religion for Islam is going to protect the Middle East from a lot of the disease that is going to be rampant throughout the Middle Ages. There is a birth ceremony. When a woman gives birth to a baby, the first voice that child is supposed to hear is his father's, and he recites a specific thing to say. He basically says there is only one God and his name is Allah. And so the rest of the room is supposed to be silent, so that when the baby is born, the first thing that he hears is the father's voice. Circumcision. Islam will still do circumcision. It is still considered a rite of passage that maintains from Judaism. Of course, you have your marriage ceremonies and your death ceremonies and rites of passages that are associated with Islam and with any major religion. Holidays, there's 2 major ones. One is Ramadan. Ramadan is a month-long fast, where it is ended with a feast called Eid. Eid celebrates the end of Ramadan, and basically Ramadan is meant to remember. He participated in the fasting to try to join with God and to basically be reminded of what it is to submit to God. And then, of course, with Eid, it's a feast day. It's a 4-day celebration that will celebrate with a sacrificial sheep, and it's done to celebrate that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son to God, which is the ultimate submission to God's will. The idea that you would be willing to sacrifice your own child to God is something that is very prevalent through Islam, and again can lead to some of that political fanaticism that we were talking about associated with jihad. – Gender relations. This is a hot topic when it comes to Islam. gender relations within Islam actually has to do with the political state more than the religion. It varies from location to location because of the assimilation of Islam into local cultures. Because Islam is a universalizing religion, you're going to see basically some local flavor get into all of the laws that are associated with Islam. Islamic law is actually very freeing to women. It says that they can own, buy, sell, and inherit their own property. They can also ask for a divorce or an annulment of their marriage. That's a lot of power. Most of the laws are interpretations by political states, and what they do is they use religion to support those laws. So they're not necessarily, Islam itself doesn't necessarily not support the Western idea about gender relations, and we have to think about the democratic Western ideals as something that we may not necessarily want to force on other people, but really what's going on with gender relations is a state issue, not really a religion issue. Something that I did want to discuss about women is the head coverings. So there's several different types. The burqa is used mainly in Saudi Arabia, and burqa is one where you are covered from head to toe. You can see the different types. The hijab is the most commonly used. That's the one you actually probably see more here in the U.S. than you do elsewhere. And if you notice, some Muslim states, women do not cover their heads at all. The idea of covering their head and covering their hair comes from the idea that they are meant only for their husband. It's not necessarily, the women themselves do not see it as oppressive. They see it as protective. Obviously, there's both sides of this. There are Muslim women who feel that it is oppressive. There's Muslim women who feel that it is protective. Most of the Western world feels like women wearing these outer garments is meant to be, is a symbol of oppressiveness. And that's not necessarily true. Some women, a lot of women, especially girls who grow up in the United States, are given the choice on whether they want to wear the hijab or want to wear any type of head covering. That's not the case in some political states require women to be covered. So this is a very controversial topic, and there's no one right or wrong answer with it. There's not really, it's just controversial. However, I did want you guys to look at it on the other side as well, instead of just thinking of it as a Western, and the tense that we as Westerners tend to think of it as more of a political oppression rather than something that these women are choosing to do. One of the biggest issues that you need to understand is the split between the Sunni and the Shiites. It was a political split. The Shiites believed that the political ambitions were not part of pure Islam, that the idea of creating a caliphate, the idea of creating a big empire was not something that Muhammad or God himself wanted the people to do. Basically, the Imam is a religious leader, kind of like the Pope, okay, or a priest. And the idea was that who should be the Imam and who should be the Caliph. So basically there's two forms of leadership. You have the caliphate, and the caliph became both a political and religious leader. However, the problem was should that leader be a descendant of Muhammad? The Shiites feel that the leader of Islam should be a direct descendant, a blood relative of Muhammad. Only 16% of today's Muslims are actually Shiites. Most of them live in Iran. There were 11 imams who were direct descendants of Muhammad, who were attempting to become political leaders. 11 of them were assassinated, and the 12th one went into hiding. Now, this is centuries and centuries ago. Most Shiites accept the current government system in which they live. Twelver Shiism is a form of Islam that is actually waiting for the return of the 12th Imam. And I only mention this because we will discuss the use of this as propaganda later in the Safavid Empire. Here's just some ideas of the religious spread. You can see what the dark orange is Muhammad. That's the caliphate that Muhammad was able to create before he died. Then you add the first 4 caliphs, and that's the lighter orange color. Then we have our first dynasty, the Umayyads. The Umayyads are going to add everything that is green. You can see that they got really far into Europe. There is a battle called the Battle of Tours. It's actually on your must-know dates list in 732, where a Frenchman, Charles the Hammer Martel, is going to prevent the spread of Islam further into Europe, and that battle is a true splitting between the Muslim and Christian world. And then you can see the blue is what manages to maintain Christianity, manages to not be impacted by the spread of the caliphates. And you can see the military campaigns that they were taking as under the idea of creating a larger Muslim empire. Here you can see all the way to the present. The red is from the Middle Ages, the 1580s up until now. You can see that Islam is going to spread quite far into Africa, all the way through the Sahara Desert, basically. And you can see that we have a large population of Muslims on both coasts, not so much in the middle, but on the coastal regions, and then actually in Michigan. Part of the reason for that is because of the technology, where IT is, where economic opportunity is. Believe it or not, a lot of the Michigan has to do with the University of Michigan and some of their engineering programs and some of their healthcare programs. You can see there's a little bit of Islam spreading into Canada at this point. Most of the spread of Islam outside of the Middle East was done through trade. You can see the coastal east coast of Africa. All of that was done through the Indian Ocean trade routes, which you will learn about. And there were Muslim merchants that basically just impacted. And again, because Islam is a universalizing religion, people are going to it very easily. Today, here's just some numbers of where the Muslims live. You can see the majority of them are actually in the Asia-Pacific region. Indonesia, Java, actually has a very large population of Muslims in it. You can see there's an increasing amount of Muslims living in Europe because of migration patterns from Africa into Europe as of late. Of course, sub-Saharan Africa is going to be a large amount of Muslims because of those trade patterns that I was just talking about. And then, of course, your Middle East is going to be your largest amount. In the United States, there's 4.6 million living, which is only 0.3% of our population. Islam today is the fastest growing religion. Currently, it is starting to beat out Christianity in regards to converts. People are converting to Islam on a regular basis. Just to kind of talk about some of the architecture associated with Islam. Islam does not encourage the use of images. They don't feel that you can capture the image of God in any type of artwork. So a lot of their churches and things are going to be, mosques, not churches, are going to be decorated using geometric art and geometric shapes. You'll see that when you will actually work with the Hagia Sophia, which is a Christian church that turned into a mosque once the Ottomans took over Turkey, and you'll see a huge amount of changes associated with the architectural techniques of the Muslims. You can see that the dome is going to come out of Rome and impact the churches and the mosque throughout the Muslim caliphates. Every mosque will have what's called a minaret. The minaret is the tower. The purpose of the tower is for the, basically there's a guy who calls everybody to prayer 5 times a day, and before the advent of speakers, he would have to be heard throughout the entire village, and so the minaret, that was the purpose of it, was for the call to prayer to be heard everywhere. This is an interesting mix between Muslim architecture and European architecture. It's the Mosque of Cordoba, which is in Spain. Remember that the Umayyad dynasty is going to be able to make it up into Spain. So you can see this mix. You can see the Roman architecture with, even on the bridge, you can see the arches that are used in the bridge. You can see some of the domes that are used more in a European style. But then you have this beautiful minaret that is built as well. So and then right below the minarets, you've got all of these different arches. So you can see that Spain is a great mix between European architecture and Muslim architecture.